It is interesting.
It's an interesting challenge.
Why don't we talk about it a little bit? I mean, so we just talked about CNN's ratings, under 450,000 viewers. And then the average Joe Rogan episode gets 11 million downloads, at least according to the latest.
Oh, come on. You can't do apples and bananas like that.
Well, yeah, but okay. So, but since you're the media critic, I'm kind of curious, like, why don't you talk it through?
I'll talk it through this way. I would say CNN, the way that I look at ratings for CNN, MSNBC, or Fox is not the hourly rating, but the cumulative rating. How many tens of millions of people are watching on any given day, week, or month? And that number, to me, is an important one. It's not about any individual show. It's about experience with the brand. And with CNN getting tens of millions of viewers a month, I think that's a healthy place to be. And that's, I think, a fairer comp to Joe Rogan, where Rogan obviously has a big fan base. But if you were to look at how many people are listening to him this hour, it wouldn't be nearly as big. And so that would be, so that to me is the apples by apples. What's the weekly or monthly cume? Now, that cume decline, again, it goes back to the buoy in the ocean. The monthly audience declines and there's less going on. It rises when there's more going on. But overall, you still have people, I think vast majorities of Americans who know that Reuters and Associated Press and Yahoo and CNN and NBC are out there gathering the raw materials for everyone else to talk about. Now, I also think we have to inject into that the recognition of hyper-partisan landscape, right? That there is a right-wing media universe that's almost entirely separate from what people usually call mainstream, which I think is not the right word to use because it's been turned into the word mainstream has become a derogatory word, among a lot of folks. So there's this right-wing media universe, almost entirely separate, creates its own storylines and stuff out there. And then there is actually a left-wing media universe. It's not nearly as big, but it's actually left-wing media that pushes a liberal or democratic agenda, and that exists as well. So you have these different, within that constellation, you have all these different sources. Here's where I come down, Alex. People are overwhelmed. They are confused. They don't know where to go, what to believe, what to trust, who to watch, who to try. And that, I think, is a situation that's only accelerating. And so that leads me to think about technology and think about startup world. What can be created to help people navigate through information saturation? We know it's only going to get thicker and more saturated. We know it's only going to get crazier with the amount of content produced by robots that appears to be from humans. We know it's only going to get more saturated. And so what should we be making? How can we be helping people get through it? And how can we help people figure out how to navigate it? That to me is a fascinating thing.
So let's go a little bit deeper onto this because, maybe instead of saying it's CNN and it's Joe Rogan, it is, the mainstream news and the people who are investing in news gathering, right? Paying reporters to gather news. And then you have Rogan, you have the right-wing podcasts, you have the left-wing podcasts, you have the YouTubers, you have the activity on TikTok. And in a lot of these areas, it seems like people would much rather go to a Rogan than to a mainstream network. Why do you think that is?
To the extent that I buy the premise, I think it's because people already know the headlines or they think they know the headlines and they don't feel like they need more of that raw material. Now, I love reading a magazine cover story in print. I'm old fashioned. I want more of that, like raw material news gathering, interpretation. But I think that there is clearly a sense that you've seen it all on your phone. You know what's going on. You think about the way that, I like to think about my brothers instead of, back when I was at CNN, I would think, how do my brothers consume the news, right? They want to know, is anything going to affect their commute? Is anything happening in the world that's so interesting or so crazy or so scary they need to pay attention? And if not, great, leave me alone. And in that case, it's more fun to go and listen to a podcast or watch a football game than to engage in the news. I think the news industry, and I was a part of this problem that I'm about to identify. I often would start my stories in the middle instead of starting my story at the beginning. What that means is a story or a TV segment kind of assumed you already knew what I was talking about before it started, rather than starting at the beginning of the story. And a lot of news materials created that way, where the story is in the middle. So I think there's so much space for innovation and creativity and new ways of telling the news that might appeal to people who right now don't feel like they need it or don't feel like it's for them. And they end up listening to a cool podcast instead.
Yeah. And the fact that we have technology now, it enables that sort of explosion of different content in a way that sort of you used to only have the media to tell you what was going on, and now you can put a pair of headphones in your ears, hold a smartphone, and there's so many different sources. And it's sort of what you signed off with your show on. Yeah.
Every single person's a member of the media. Most of us are creating content at the same time we are consuming content. And that's, the fundamental power dynamic shift that all these companies, all these entrenched companies have to grapple with. And that's true, I think, in entertainment to some degree, as well as in news. The problem that I see across news and entertainment is a discovery problem. I know that there are so many shows on Netflix that I should watch and I would enjoy, and it is still hard to discover them. You can you can rave about the algorithm, and Netflix has done a lot right, and I think right now it's still underpriced. I think there's so much growth still to come. But I look at Netflix and I think we're still in the early days of getting to this, solving the discovery problem. And not just for me, but for my mom. I was at my mom's house last week, and she still did not know, and I don't mean this to rag on my mom, okay? She still barely knew how to use Netflix on Roku. And she didn't have her own profile. She was still using mine. Now, I know in a few months we'll have to stop sharing passwords, and she'll have to pay up. But she will be happy to pay when she has a fully built-out profile, when she knows how to actually navigate it. I think we sometimes underestimate this stuff ain't easy. This stuff is not always easy. I know it's easy for my 5-year-old on her iPad, but it's not easy for a lot of the rest of us. And so I see a lot of potential there, both in news and entertainment, to try to make the technology work for us rather than the other way around.
So do you think at times the mainstream media can help play into what the alternative sources are trying to do? I mean, a lot of ways that they get an audience is they sell themselves against what you're seeing on a CNN, for instance. And, I called a friend who's, he's not a media personality, but kind of interested in all these worlds. And he immediately pointed to like the ivermectin thing, where CNN said that Rogan was on or suggested that he was using a medicine that was a horse tranquilizer, where it was prescribed by his doctor. And I'm curious if that, there's a bar that the mainstream needs to hit that's so high when you're saying, okay, you can come to us for like the primary source reporting, that if you don't hit it, then you can you can push people to other directions. What do you think about that?
I think if you're going to expect, I think the nature of news is, by the way, all this is going to sound like bullshit defense when it's actually true, okay?
Oh, yeah, it's good to hear what you have to say.
If you expect, you have to recognize that the news coverage is iterative, that it evolves, that stories evolve, that so much of what happens on television news is fleeting and ephemeral, and a clip that made total sense 3 years ago might make no sense now, when stripped of all context. And by the way, I think that's something that happens to Fox News as well. It's not just, I'm not just saying it happens on one team or another, or one side or one tribe. When stripped of context, things take on different meanings. So news is iterative, stories change, science evolves, studies evolve, more, we learn more. We should want it to work that way. It's the right way. All that said, I feel like sometimes there are grifters who will go out and they will place 100 bets, okay? And then 10 of their bets will turn out to pay out. And they will go and they will celebrate those 10 and delete the 90 and pretend like the other 90 didn't happen, and pretend like they were right 100% of the time when they were only right 10% of the time. That is not journalism. That's not responsible media production. That's bullshit grifting. And yet we see a lot of that in the disinformation world. Well, let me just back up. Disinformation is not quite the right word for that. Disinformation is much more, I think, malicious. But I think we see a lot of this attempt to say, I can't think of like an exact name of a person. I don't want to call out one person on this, but I think we see a lot of it. They say, I'm an alternative to the mainstream, which always gets it wrong. Well, they get it wrong a lot too. It's just that they bury their errors or their whatever, and they're not investing in the raw material journalism out there gathering facts. It's easy to point to the local news crisis in this country. It's easy because it's true. We have a local news crisis. We have a lack of reporting on the ground. But those people who are actually gathering material, news on the ground, they're the ones we should celebrate. We shouldn't point out when they screw up 1 out of 100 times and then condemn them for eternity. We should try to help make their work better and stronger, rather than be destructive, which I think is where we see a lot of media criticism from the right that's focused on trying to destroy media. We should be constructive. We should try to make it better. And there are great conservative media critics like Jim Garrity and others who do that, who say, try to encourage the media, the whatever you think of as the media, because the media is everything to different people, to make it better and not try to tear it down. And I guess this sounds like crazy defense, but that's where, that's the way that I see this environment where you have these folks trying to claim that they knew all along. I don't know, the COVID stuff you could spend it seems like some people want to live in 2020 forever. There are some people who there are some people who want to live with 2020 forever and never embrace the fact that it's 2023. And that's probably all I should say about that.
Totally. And it's interesting because news is iterative. And I think what folks would want is like news to be more open when they do get things wrong. And, I guess there was never a real walk back or never like a real like, hey, this person wasn't on horse tranquilizer. It was a human medicine. And I maybe I missed it. So that's kind of where I think that the media
that's a fair, first of all, that's a fair point in two ways. Number one, I am sure that there was that follow-up, and I am sure that most people missed it. Like, how could you possibly, in this saturated information environment, let's just for fun do a hypothetical. Let's say CBS News aired a report to 10 million people that had several mistakes. Let's say they ran correction